Watch Mike Donahue, only on News Center 6.
Calling the roll for Dole. Tonight, the Republicans officially nominate Bob Dole for president and hear a dramatic tribute from his wife, Oprah style, as she works the audience off the podium. A new poll indicates Dole still has problems as the nagging issue of abortion continues to cause him trouble.
Dan Rather, Ed Bradley, Leslie Stahl, Bob Schieffer, and Paul Azan from the 1996 Republican Convention in San Diego. Here's Dan Rather.
Good evening. He has been working for this moment for 16 years, some would say most of his life. Tonight, Bob Dole of Kansas, child of the Depression, wounded war hero, veteran U.S. Senator, will be named officially the Republican candidate for President of the United States. But first, Elizabeth Dole will present a highly choreographed tribute to her husband, trying to work the convention floor sort of Oprah Winfrey style. Women have been given a high profile at this convention, and that's no accident. A new CBS News poll indicates Dole still has major problems attracting women voters. Another nagging problem for Dole, abortion. His advisors are now wrangling over whether to include his own pro-life position, as he calls it, in tomorrow night's acceptance speech. That, of course, would please the religious right here at the convention, or leave it out to appeal to the wider audience at home, especially women. And while organizers think this tightly scripted convention has been playing well at home, 60 Minutes correspondent Leslie Stahl is finding a different story down on the floor. Leslie?
Dan, that's right. We're hearing a lot of grousing about the repackaging of the party. We've spoken to delegates in Louisiana, Missouri, other delegations who are saying, where are our issues in gagging opponents of abortion, affirmative action, those kinds of issues? Bob Dole may be turning off the very people he needs to leave this convention gung-ho. They say putting 3 pro-choice women on last night was too much. But Bob Dole has a dilemma. In order to win, he does have to change the perception of this party as too extreme. Dan?
Thanks, Leslie. Our new CBS News poll shows that Bob Dole's economic plan, calling for big tax cuts, has drawn some interest from voters. 60 Minutes correspondent Ed Bradley is now with Senator Al D'Amato of New York, a member of the Senate Finance Committee. Ed, let's see what he has to say.
Senator, you've said you've had to have spending cuts to go along with those tax cuts. What are the cuts? Where do they come from?
Well, let me tell you that they have put them in this plan. And what we see here is a plan that's going to really stimulate the economy because, Ed, working middle-class families are falling further and further behind. Our growth has never been as low in 100 years. Only in depressions has our growth been lower than what we've had in these last 4 years. And that's why you raise taxes on middle-class families, you're punishing them. They're taking home less than ever before, and we need to cut taxes desperately.
Quickly, will he have to cut Medicare, as you said?
No.
Not at all?
No, absolutely not. And what that is people taking things out of context, trying to twist them around and apply them. And you know what? That's Bill Clinton and his Democratic team at the worst. Putting up ads that are disingenuous and not truthful.
Thank you, Senator. Dan, back to you.
Thanks, Ed. Let's go to the podium and our chief Washington correspondent, Bob Schieffer. Bob, what is it that Bob Dole hopes will be accomplished tonight at this convention?
I think basically to begin to introduce Bob Dole to the American people. Here's a man who will be now in his 4th national campaign, but Republicans still believe they have to explain and define him to the American people. Tonight, his close friends and his family will begin that job, but really it's just setting the table for tomorrow night because everyone here agrees the man who has to close the deal and convince Americans he ought to be the next president is Bob Dole himself. That's how it ought to be. Dan?
Thanks very much, Bob. Now, nearly everyone agrees that the convention organizers had a plan, they've worked their plan, that they definitely have gotten what they wanted up on the screen for the most part at this convention. But that's a different thing than having a successful convention in the political sense that it moves voters or gives you a chance, gives you an opening to convince voters. Has it been successful? We have a new CBS News poll indicating how this may be playing at home, and Paul Azan has it, Paul.
Well, Dan, the Dole campaign is hoping that this convention will not only energize the party faithful, but attract women voters. Bob Dole has picked up some support, but even with that, Republicans are still concerned he and Jack Kemp cannot win in November. Our new poll shows that nearly 2/3 of all registered voters say they think that Bill Clinton will win the election. There has been some improvement, though, in the way women view Bob Dole. Of course, we don't know the full impact of Susan Molinari's keynote speech last night, but our poll also shows by more than a 2-to-1 margin, women believe it's the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party, that cares about them the most. Dan?
Paul Lazan on the floor. We'll be back after these messages, so stay here with us.
This portion of CBS News coverage of the Republican National Convention is sponsored by the men and women of General Motors, people in motion. And by new Accid AR, proven so effective, it can prevent heartburn completely.
You know, heartburn medicines have been around for years. First came Tagamet, then Zantac, then Pepcid. But the newest, Accid, now in non-prescription strength as new Accid AR. The only one that says right on its labeling, for many, it can prevent heartburn completely. That's something 2 Tagamet HB, Zantac 75, and Pepcid AC just don't claim. New Accid AR, proven it can prevent heartburn completely.
All right, you got your license? Sure. Registration's in the glove compartment.
Okay.
And watch your mirrors all the time.
I will.
Keep your eyes on the road.
Drive safe.
Okay, bye, guys.
And remember, it's our car.
All right.
You live your life in motion, but that doesn't mean you never have to stop.
Yes.
Well, not exactly bulletin material, but it looks like California's Governor Pete Wilson is out of the doghouse. You know, from his view, he'd been put so far back in the doghouse they had to FedEx him daylight. But now he's been asked to introduce Elizabeth Dole at tonight's session. He's in the process of doing that. Now, until tonight, Wilson was not scheduled to speak, even though he is the governor of the host state, a former member of the host city, and the co-chairman of Bob Dole's campaign in the most populous state in the nation. But Wilson maintained his invitation to speak had been withdrawn after he refused to back down from his challenge to the GOP platform's anti-abortion plank. But at any rate, Wilson now is getting to appear, and he's going to introduce Elizabeth Dole from the podium. He's now in the process of doing that. He follows Robin Dole, Bob Dole's only daughter by his first marriage. Let's pick up the end of what Pete Wilson is saying.
And a very special friend of mine. For the last 5 years, this exceptional woman has served as the dynamic president of the American Red Cross. She has served in the cabinet of 2 great Republican presidents, Ronald Reagan and George Bush. But best of all, now she is about to serve a 3rd great Republican president as the next First Lady of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my high honor and great pleasure to introduce my friend Elizabeth Dole.
Elizabeth Dole is 60 years old. She doesn't look it. She's been Senator Bob Dole's wife for 20 years. Now, what she's going to do is address this convention and introduced several people who played important roles in Dole's recovery and his life. Later on, she'll have a kind of performance unprecedented by Want to Be First Lady.
Thank you so much, ladies.
By going into the audience in front of the podium.
Welcome, and thank you, Governor Wilson, for your very kind words of introduction. Now, you know, tradition is that speakers at the Republican National Convention remain at this very imposing podium. But tonight I'd like to break with tradition for two reasons. One, I'm going to be speaking to friends, and secondly, I'm going to be speaking about the man I love. And it's just a lot more comfortable for me to do that down here with you. Thank you. Mr. Governor, how are you doing tonight?
Great. Congratulations.
Now, for the last several days, a number of men and women have been painting a remarkable portrait of a remarkable man, a man who is the strongest and the most compassionate, most tender person that I've ever known. The man who, quite simply, is my own personal Rock of Gibraltar. And tonight I want to put the finishing brush strokes on that portrait, if you will. And Bob Dole, if you're watching, let me just warn you. I may be saying some things that you in your modesty would never be willing to talk about. But I think that the people you've been serving all these years in America deserve to know. They have the right to know. This is not a time to be silent. This is a defining moment, ladies and gentlemen, in our nation's history. This election is about the vision and the values that will shape America as we move into the next century. And it's about the character of the man who will lead us there. Now, thanks. Now, Lisa. Bob Dole, as you know, was born in Kansas, in a small town of Kansas. His family. Hey, Bob. How are you doing? Hi there. Now what do I do? Is he going to speak or am I going to speak? I'm not sure. That was a nice surprise. But let me say that, yes, he was born in a small town in Kansas. His parents were poor. In fact, at one point, when Bob was a boy, they had to move their family, parents and 4 children, into the basement and rent out their small home, the upstairs, just to make ends meet. But while they were perhaps poor in material things, they were rich in values. Values like honesty, decency, respect, personal responsibility, hard work, love of God, love of family, patriotism. These were the values that led Bob to risk his life on the battlefields of Italy. And these were the values that enabled him to sustain over 3 years in the hospital. Now, I didn't know Bob back then, but Pat Lynch did. Pat, stand a moment if you would. Come right up here with me. Pat Lynch is from Boone, Iowa, and she was... Pat was one of Bob's nurses at Percy Jones Hospital in Battle Creek, Michigan. Pat has told me about Bob's good humor and how they used to wheel him from ward to ward to cheer up the other wounded soldiers. I think we're having a little technical difficulty. She's also told me that Bob was very patient and that he tapped his inner resources so that he could endure not just day after day, but month after month. I think we're, yes. Also, there we are.
That was a radio mic. She's now had to go to a different one. There are hardwire mics around because this is a difficult haul for this kind of operation.
Paralyzed. And people thought he wouldn't walk again. He literally willed himself to walk. He was a person of great perseverance and determination and drive. And he recovered fully except for the use of his right arm in the 3 years over the hospital. But during that period of time, I think Bob's sensitivity to the problems of others certainly was deepened as well, because he's been there. He's been through adversity. He's known pain and suffering. It was at this time in his life that he got to know Dr. Hampar Kalikian. Now, Hampar Kalikian was a great surgeon, Chicago, Illinois. And Dr. Kalikian had fled Armenia, war-torn Armenia, as a young man. 3 of his sisters were not so fortunate. But he came to the United States with only $2 and a rug from his homeland under his arm. And Dr. Kalikian, at that point, a young boy, worked on a farm, and the owner of the farm was so impressed with him that he paid his way through college. And then he went on to medical school, and he became a great surgeon, a master in bone and joint surgery. And so Bob Dole went to Dr. Kalikian looking for a miracle, because he wanted to be the person he had been before the war, a great athlete, a person who was on his way to study medicine. Dr. Kalikian performed a number of operations, and then he had to administer some tough love. He had to say to Bob, "You're not going to find the miracle. Now, the choice is up to you, Bob. You can continue to feel sorry for yourself, or you can get on with your life and work to make the most of what you do have." Dr. Kalikian would not take a penny of money for those operations. And he did the same for many other young veterans coming back from the war who were not able to afford the medical care that they needed. So you can imagine how much we cherish the friendships of Dr. Kalikian's widow, of Sana Kalikian, and her daughter, Alice. Alice. Thanks, dear. Thank you. And certainly Bob has known the struggle to make ends meet. In fact, he couldn't have had a college education if it were not for the GI Bill. And so he's going to protect and preserve and strengthen that safety net for those who need it. Also, he's dedicated his life to making a difference, a positive difference for others because of his own experiences. Whether it's on the battlefield, on the Senate floor, or whether it's in his personal life, he's going to be making that difference for others. And you know, it was only... It was about 12 years ago that I recall so well Bob coming home from a trip to Kansas. We were sitting in the bedroom talking, and he said, "Elizabeth, my plane was late, and they were trying to rush me into a meeting out there, and there were these 2 young people who were waiting outside the door to talk with me, and they were severely disabled, and they were there with their parents. Tim and Carla were their names." And he said, "Tim said to me, Senator Dole, we found a source of help for people who have a disability such as ours in another state. Can you help us get there?" And as Bob was telling me about it, he said, "I can't stop thinking about Tim and Carla. Elizabeth, I've been meaning to start a foundation for people with disabilities for years, and I haven't done it yet." Well, very soon thereafter, the Dole Foundation was up and running, and Bob's raised millions of dollars to help people with disabilities. Tim, I want to thank you for your courage and your spirit. Thank you, Tim, for inspiring Bob Dole to start the Dole Foundation for people with disabilities. We love you. Thank you. Bless you. And I remember about 10 years ago, Bob and I were about to celebrate our birthdays, which are 7 days apart in late July, and Bob suggested a reverse birthday. He said, Elizabeth, let's go to Sarah's Circle, which is a very special place in inner city Washington that houses and ministers to elderly poor. And he said, let's find out what the 35 or 40 residents most need and want, and we'll give them the gifts, give them the party. And so that's what we did, and we've had many wonderful visits there since with cherished friends. And our most recent reverse birthday was just 3 weeks ago at Sarah's Circle. And I remember a Thanksgiving, probably 3 or 4 years ago, when Bob called up and he said, you know, Elizabeth, he said, I'd like to do something a little different this Thanksgiving. And he sounded kind of sheepish because, you see, he'd already put the plans in motion. And I said, well, Bob, what would you like to do? And he said, well, I've invited 35 young people from some pretty tough parts of Washington and their church sponsors to have Thanksgiving dinner with us. Well, he had already reserved some places for us at a restaurant, and he'd had them put in some television so the kids could watch the Redskins game. But I think what touched us so deeply was that after they finished their Thanksgiving meal and they'd finished watching the game, they began to talk about their life stories. And the common thread that ran through so many of those stories was that these kids, until very recently, had never heard anyone say, I care about you. I care about you. Ladies and gentlemen, you didn't read about that Thanksgiving dinner in the newspaper or hear about it in the media because Bob Dole never told anybody about it. He did it from his heart. He wants to... He wants to make a difference, a positive difference for others because he cares, because that's who he is. And I certainly will never forget his last day as Majority Leader of the United States Senate. I was seated up in the balcony, you know, and I was watching as senator after senator, Democrats and Republicans, stood and paid tribute to my husband on the Senate floor. They talked about his countless legislative achievements, how he had led the United States Senate to successfully pass the largest tax cut in the history of the United States of America. They talked about how he had saved Social Security. And I just want to quote from a letter. This is Claude Pepper. As you know, he was the champion of seniors. And he wrote to Bob May 11th, 1983. He thanked Bob for his extraordinary contributions, saying, and I quote, "You never lost hope and faith in our accomplishing the immeasurable task of saving Social Security. We could never have produced this result without your skill and sincerest desire to make a meaningful contribution." That's leadership, ladies and gentlemen. They also talked about how, okay, folks, they also talked about how Bob had led the Senate just last year to save Medicare, increasing spending 62%, only to have the White House veto the legislation, provide no other alternative for saving the system except a multi-million-dollar ad campaign to scare our senior citizens. They talked about Bob's incredible ability to bring people together and his tremendous sense of humor. And you know, that reminds me of the time that I was up for confirmation hearings before one of the committees of the Senate for Secretary of Transportation. And my husband introduced me, and you know what he did to me? He sort of did a takeoff on Nathan Hale. He said, "I regret that I have but one wife to give for my country's infrastructure." That's Bob Dole. But above all, these senators, Democrats and Republicans, talked about Bob's character, his honesty, his integrity. And I remember Senator Pete Domenici, beautiful speech that you gave. And when you concluded your speech, you said, "The next majority leader of the United States Senate better know that he better be honest. He'd better tell the Senate the truth because Bob Dole knew no other way." Remember that, Pete? And Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, said, Bob Dole's word, listen to this now, Bob Dole's word is his commitment, and his commitment is a matter of honor. We often disagree on issues, she said, but even when we disagree, I know where I stand with Bob Dole, and I know I can trust his word. I can trust his word. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, that's why Bob Dole's fellow senators elected him 6 times to be their leader, because they know he's honest, trustworthy, a man of his word is his bond, and they know he has exceptional leadership skills. And isn't that exactly what we want in the President of the United States? And you see, these, thank you. These are the people, think about this, these are the people who know him so well, have worked with him day after day, year after year. They know what his judgment is like under pressure. And that's why they continue to put their faith and trust in him, making him the longest-serving Republican leader in Senate history, 11 years. Now, I'm also very proud of the fact that the employees of the United States Senate, the waiters, waitresses, others who work there, voted Bob twice, 4 years apart in 2 surveys, as the nicest, friendliest of all 100 senators. I'm sorry about that, Pete, but... These are employees like Trudy Parker, who's a member of the United States Capitol Police. And Trudy, bless your heart, Trudy was the first person that Bob saw on the way to work every morning while he was in the Senate. And also, that final day, I can still see you, I'll remember it forever. You threw your arms around my husband and tears were streaming down your face. And you said, Elizabeth, everywhere you go, people tell you they love Bob Dole because he always has a kind word for everyone. Bless you, Trudy. Thanks. Now, let me just say, I could go on and on sharing stories about this loving husband and father, this caring friend, but please indulge a very proud wife. Just one final story, which neither I nor my 95-year-old mother will ever forget. When Bob was dating me, he used to go to North Carolina a lot to visit my parents. And one morning, unbeknownst to me, he left his bedroom and went down where Mother was fixing breakfast in the kitchen. And he had a towel over his arm and shoulder that had been disabled in the war. And he said, Mrs. Hanford, I think you ought to see my problem. Mother said, Bob, that is not a problem. It's a badge of honor. My fellow Americans, I believe that in the years to come, future generations will look back to this November and say, here is where Americans earned a badge of honor. Here is where we elected the president who gave us more opportunities and smaller and more efficient government and stronger and safer families. Here is where we elected the better man who led us to a better America, because here is where we elected Bob Dole. God bless you all. Thank you.
Absolutely powerful performance. Whatever one thinks of what was said, this was, by anyone's standards, a tremendous performance. It was less Oprah than This Is Your Life, as it turned out. Liddy Doe delivered big time for the Republicans tonight. Certainly not since Colin Powell's closing address on Monday night has there been a moment to approach this at the convention, and perhaps this overshadows that. For one thing, Liddy Dole underscored the idea of Bob Dole caring. Now, this has been something Dole has trailed Clinton badly on in the polls, especially with women. She hit the themes patriotism, sacrifice, character. And I'll tell you something, folks. I expect there are plenty of television anchors, hosts, and performers watching tonight and silently thanking destiny that Elizabeth Dole went into politics and not television. Because she would be what's known in the industry as blowaway competition. And in carrying this off, she's pioneering a whole new form of campaigning, not just for first ladies and would-be first ladies, but for candidates in the national arena. Let's go to Ed Bradley at the back of the hall and see how it played back there. Ed, from up here, it looked dynamite.
Dan, that's the way it looked down here. I'm in the back where people here can't see those giant screens that are on either side of the podium, but there are a number of televisions scattered around. We were looking at one up there, and everybody here was sitting down just glued watching that television set, including one man who I don't think really wanted to be here, at least when he was running for the presidential nomination, Steve Forbes and his campaign. They were also glued to that television set. Dan?
Thanks, Ed. It was not so much a performance of Oprah as it was My Fair Liddy. Our CBS News coverage will continue in a moment.
To review, on a right triangle, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the
My
squares of the other
brain is
sides,
melting.
minus the color
Luckily,
to the right.
getting school supplies doesn't require this much concentration. Hey, just memorize this. Office Max. They've got great brand name products like Gemini printer cables and Hewlett-Packard printers at guaranteed low prices that won't disturb those older people that live with you. So even if school isn't your favorite place to hang, man, Office Max can get you ready. Office Max. We go to the max for you.
Bobby said he beat you. He's such a kidder.
He wasn't kidding.
Well, maybe he just got lucky.
3 in a row.
Well, maybe we need a new game plan.
Introducing New Ensure Light. Complete balanced nutrition. #1 doctor recommended. Low in fat and only 200 calories. Helps you stay healthy, active, energetic.
I think I'm ready for another.
Another chocolate?
Oh, another game.
New Ensure Light. Drink to your health.
CBS News coverage of the Republican National Convention will continue. CBS, welcome home.
Seems like everybody wants to get their paws on what they're setting out at Cattle Company.
Grilled top sirloin with pan-roasted garlic, barbecued baby back ribs, and a junior Wild West onion.
There's nothing better.
Steak topped with garlic, barbecued ribs, and your old Wild West onion, just $10.99.
The biggest name in comedy is back in a brand new show, and retirement has never been more fun.
What is the smoke? Are you yelling because you think I'm still out in the yard?
Bill Cosby and Felicia Rashad. The magic is back in Cosby, CBS Mondays this fall.
Sports with Ed Whalen, only on News Center 6.
It's time for the Oregon Lottery Megabucks drawing. First, tonight's winning daily 4 number is 8680. Now, you could be Oregon's next Megabucks millionaire. All 44 numbered balls are correctly